couple years ago, I got a call from the acting agency. They're like, you should come in, we'd like to talk to you about some roles. I'm like, I don't act. They're like, don't worry about it, we think you have a look. And in my head, I was like, oh, I guess I'm the hottest. So I go in there, it's exactly as you expect. My agent's very dressed up, she's very serious-minded. She welcomes me into this luxurious office. There's like photos on the wall with her with like B-list Canadian celebrities, like, ooh, Jason Priestley. And she sits down across from me and she says very seriously, she's like, I wanted to talk to you. And I'm like, yes. And she's like, I wanted to talk to you about your face. And then I'm like, yes. And then she says, you have the most generic face I've ever seen. I'm like, what do you mean? She's like, has it ever happened to you? You're walking around somewhere and someone's like, hey, I know you from somewhere. And I'm like, no, not really. She's like, exactly, because you look like everyone. She's like, you're perfect for commercials. You could be an unproud father, you could be a tax attorney, you could be the guy at the football game. I'm like, yeah, I could be those things. I don't act. She's like, you don't have to act. You just walk in, you show them your generic face, boom, gold mine. Junior high, I looked exactly the same. I've had the same haircut since I was 5 years old. To imagine me as a teenager, to shrink me, slap on a pair of braces, there you have it, the most bland, generic-looking kid of all time. So it's actually kind of hard to bully because there's nothing to really bully me about. I was like a wall or a piece of furniture. The thing is, I didn't even know I had a generic face. I had nowhere near this level of self-awareness. Instead, as I'm going through school, and everywhere around me, people are getting like thrown into lockers and wedged in the shower and beat up physically, but worse, emotionally, just called the meanest things. And I'm just coasting along like the privileged, middling non-entity I was so glad to be. I chalked all this good luck up to the fact that I believed in God. And to make sure I stayed on God's good side, I started praying more and more intensely and more often. First on every walk to the bus stop, then on the walks there and back, then in between classes, then during classes. And here's the thing about praying in public. You can't technically do it. It says right in the Bible, when you pray, go into your room and close the door, then your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. So to make that jive with my already pretty rigorous praying schedule, I decided to start saying my prayers silently inside my head, but with my inner voice still striving for a particular level of perfection where I enunciated flawlessly without stumbling. Grade 7, I first took biology. I learned this amazing fact about the brain. We have 100 billion brain cells, and our neurons fire 200 times a second, and each neuron is connected to 1,000 other neurons. So by multiplying 100 billion by 200 firings by 1,000 connections, you get that the brain does 20 million billion calculations per second. Which is amazing, doesn't actually mean that much. I was still sitting at my desk like, I like ham. When I got inside my brain and started to try to pray perfectly, that's when I first experienced the vast potentiality of the brain. Because for every prayer, my mind would break it down into milliseconds and milliseconds and milliseconds until I found some tiny mistake, a split second of imprecision or inattention or bad pronunciation, I'd have to start all over again. And all this happened without my consciously acknowledging what I was trying to do was impossible. It always seemed like I was about to think the perfect prayer, and I just missed it. So I'd do one more, and then just one more, and then just one more, on and on and on. It got to be, I couldn't sleep. It was just so impossible to stop. My memory of those years is just a wash of ceaseless, unrelenting prayer, repeating and repeating and repeating this litany of loneliness. No longer begging the listening God to protect or console or help me, but only to please let me get it right. First person to ever show me the internet is my dad, which is amazing because he's the most technologically useless person I've ever met. He's just now, like last year, coming around to the idea that he can send email, not just from his computer, but any computer. Getting my parents on Skype is the best because my mom's way ahead of him. She knows how to change their video display. She's always putting cat noses on his face and birthday hats on his head. Her favorite is to activate the lightning strike, which is a thunderbolt that pops up on the Skype screen and hits him in the head. And it's the best because he'll actually react in real life. He'll be like, stop that, stop that. I'm like, no, Dad, the camera is like inside the computer. He's like, stop that. So it's amazing to me, there's this one window when I was in high school where he knew more about computers than I did. He sat me down and whenever Google was before Google, he's like, type something, it'll give you the answer. I typed in Victoria, because that's where I was moving at the end of the year from Calgary to go to university. First thing that comes up on the internet is Victoria's Secret. Awkward when you're sitting there with your dad. You're like, oh, lingerie would be interesting. I'm not a sexual human being. We go down to like the second one. It's this Victoria Tourism City page. We read up together about some facts about the city, population, climate. We found this weird municipal law that street entertainers in Victoria are not allowed to give balloon animals to kids. My dad, a true conservative, was like, makes sense. When I got to university, I started to study philosophy, moral philosophy. Major reason being, other than like mad cash, was to find a suitable ethical system. I'd fallen out of touch with God. I was looking for a new moral code. And at first I was really into it. It's exactly that. You get asked classic moral questions and you get to decide what to do, how to make the world a better place. So like one of the first you get is the trolley problem, which goes like this. There's a runaway train barreling down some tracks and there's 5 people who are tied to the tracks and you are standing next to a lever which can switch the tracks, but the catch is there's another person tied to those tracks. So you have to decide what to do nothing and let 5 people die, or pull a lever and kill one. Now, usually in this situation, you go with pulling the lever, makes intuitive sense. Killing one person is not the highlight of the day, but it's better than watching 5 die. But then they start piling alternatives on you. They're like, what if you're not just pulling the lever and you're more actively committing murder? You have to push a fat man off the bridge onto the tracks and he stops the train. And what if a fat man is a saint and the 5 people on the tracks are total dicks? What if you can derail a train and it goes down a hill into a yard where a man is sleeping in a hammock and he gets killed? What about then? Is it fair to kill an innocent bystander? And what about privilege, the gender, age, education, race of all the people involved? Like, how does that affect your mind state, and what does that say? Like, what if you can hit all 5 and they survive and they go to the hospital and they're all on life support and they each require a different organ transplant, then a man walks in with all 5 available organs? What do you do then? Do you kill him? What if he's homeless? What if he's Gandhi? You want to kill Gandhi? I really started to hate philosophy. It only clarified what I was trying to avoid, the infinite complexity of moral questioning. Worse, it made the problems abstract, when in reality, morality is exactly the opposite. So fast forward through our months, I'm in bed, I'm lying beside my girlfriend, I'm feeling her just start to drift off, when she suddenly pulls back and stares at me. She says, "What's happening? Your heart is beating so fast. I was falling asleep and it woke me up because I could feel it. What's going on?" What was going on is I had started to obsess about very violent, very disturbing images. So just like in junior high, when I performed hours and hours of prayer while going to school and playing sports, I was now doing the same in university, living this dual life of inner anxious repetition while outside trying to maintain a flat line. I had to tell my girlfriend something, and since I wasn't going to give her the content of the thoughts, I just made up some neutral, clinical-sounding answer, like, "I'm having intrusive ideas, which make me feel disquieted." It's the most cryptic thing you can possibly tell someone. Luckily, she was a saint about it, really great, especially for someone so young. She was supportive, she was non-judgmental, she was great. She was studying kinesiology. A couple weeks later, she called me, she's like, "Hey, I think we're learning something in class which reminds me of what you say happens with your thoughts." She's like, "There's this mental illness where someone gets a negative thought and it repeats in their head like on a feedback loop and you can't stop it. It's called obsessive compulsive disorder." Which made me skeptical because I'd heard about this vaguely, the kind of people who have to wash their hands all the time, or Jack Nicholson's character in As Good as It Gets, where he couldn't step on the different colored sidewalk parts. Don't get me wrong, I wanted an illness, I craved an illness. Anything that explained that I wasn't a monster was cool by me. But I was also a bit egotistical about my suffering. If I did have a disorder, I wanted something hardcore, like schizophrenia. Obsessive compulsive disorder just sounded silly, like, "Man, my foot, the sidewalk." But I started doing my own research and I found this thing called pure O. It's a derivative of OCD where you can have obsessions with no physical manifestations, which was just like me. So to confirm, I went to one of the psychologists at the university residence. I didn't tell him what I'd been studying, I just described the very general pattern of my thinking. Of his own accord, he was like, "Sounds like OCD." I never remember anything. Like if I take out a library book, it is mine forever. But I remember that meeting. To hear a psychologist, someone who's gone to school for a decade to study psychological distress, confirm to my face I had an illness, verifiable, certifiable, real, honest to goodness illness that meant I was not, despite my own best attempts to convince myself, a monster. The relief. It's unlike anything I've ever felt. It's almost worth going through all that just to feel so amazing. I shook that doctor's hand, I went outside, it was morning, there was a sheet of mist across the cars. I walked back across campus crying, reveling in the euphoria of being able for the first time in so long to just relax. I actually put my fist up into the sky, like the guy at the end of the Breakfast Club. And I kind of caught myself halfway, like, this is pretty dumb. But I just kept going because anything, right? That's the feeling you get, anything. I can do anything now. And those are my excerpts from Brain. Thank you for listening to that first. Check, check. Yeah, you can just mute this one. Now I'm like double microphone. So as you can probably imagine, the show's Brain is about kind of my own journey with OCD, and so it doesn't end there. Diagnosis is one part of it, but then, I thought it would get a lot better, and it didn't. It got much worse, and so it continues on in that kind of vein, but it gives you the idea of kind of the tenor of that piece. Brain is 52 minutes long, and so that leaves presenters with another, 45 minutes of the second half. They're like, what are you going to do next? So I do a combination of songs and stories and poems. I've been touring as a performance poet for about 15 years and played in a folk band called the Fugitives. So this is kind of the one excerpt of something I do in the second half. Everything in this song is true. In grade 4, I wrote a story called A Beaver Who Lost His Teeth, about a beaver who lost his teeth so he couldn't cut down trees. Then one day in the woods, he was shot at by a hunter. In surprise, the beaver jumped up and hit the tree with his tail, and the tree fell on the hunter. So the beaver saw that he could cut down trees with his tail, so the problem was resolved. This isn't realistic. In real life, some obstacles prove taxing, and if you're a beaver without teeth, you're probably screwed. You certainly couldn't cut down trees by chopping at them with your tail. It's a tail, not a chainsaw. Did I write this story on drugs? No, I was 9, but kids have a lot in common with people on drugs. Like how they laugh and stare off into space till you're like, kid, are you stoned? Why are you so happy? Are you giggling at the dumpster or awing at the floor? Kid, are you there? A beaver without teeth is gonna die, gonna die, gonna die. We're all gonna die. It's my happiest song. I love that it's getting spontaneous applause here. You dark, dark humans. It's like, it's a sing-along. In adolescence, Bertrand Russell would go off to a hillside, watch the sunset, and then think about committing suicide. But he didn't kill himself, and the reason that he gave was, and I quote, I wish to learn more mathematics. Which is sad, because there's more to life than mathematics, like sex and drugs and rock and roll, and just hanging out with your mom. Bertrand Russell turned out to be someone Nelson Mandela admired and looked up to. Man, how great must you be for a man like Mandela to think that you were greater if he thought the same of me. I would brag to every girl. So hey, teenager, don't get too excited for your acne or your voice change or the cruelty of your peers as you deal with enough hormones to take down a small animal. Sit back, relax, think of math. We'll see you on the other side. When my grandfather died, his funeral was at a church, and the thing about a church is no one goes there anymore. And if nobody goes, how will we socialize with elders? Because there are so few forums for the young and old alike. And if the young and the old aren't in communication, who will talk about the future with a reference to the past? And who will talk about the past with a view towards the future? If I did not know my grandfather, what will I live without? I can best recall one thing. It was the sound he made when we played chess. He'd stare hard at the board, and whenever someone moved, he'd say, It was the sound of paying attention, and attention stems from love. So hey, grandfather, we have no similarities. I've been passed on by the body, it's been passed on through you. Hey, grandfather, the earth is rushing back for me, and I don't believe in deities, but I wish I could see you on the other side.